And now we visit with the Representative John Blanton from the 92nd District. John, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Larry. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate this. You guys have wrapped up a special session to provide legislation and by extension, relief to Eastern Kentucky, an area of the state that is in desperate need of it after the historic flooding a few weeks back. And you really were the driving engines behind all of this with the Mountain Caucus. And talk a little bit about how this deal came together and what it's going to do.
Well, immediately after beginning to assess things on the ground after the flooding occurred last month, communications began with the executive branch and leadership from the House and the Senate of what we could do to help with this situation. We began looking at damages to infrastructure and obviously to individuals as well, and began crafting something where we could send some relief funds up that way to help them to get infrastructure restored, where we could begin to get people's houses cleaned and or removed, whatever the situation may be, and began to rebuild. And it is a long process, but it began just days after the flooding, and we were able to come together and work collectively. The governor said it was not bipartisan but nonpartisan, and I agree with that, but I told him I wanted to go one step farther and say this was a Kentucky bill for Kentuckians. Mm-hmm. Right now, there is no partisanship in any of this going on. It's all about helping fellow Kentuckians.
$212 million, actually $212.7 million. Representative Blanton, I mean, my first kind of reaction is how much can you do for $212 million? I mean, I know that's a lot of money for an individual, but for a state and for an area of the state that's in a terrible shape, is $212 million. How much of a dent can that put into what the problems that's facing the folks in Eastern Kentucky? Is that enough?
Well, that we're calling this a first step. We have to begin rebuilding, repairing, and then gather more information. 30 days is a very quick turnaround to be able to put this kind of money into a national disaster like this, especially at the state level. And we've been able to do that because of our reserve trust fund we've built up over the last 5 years. And this is the first step. I'm certain that we will be coming back in January, and we're going to be continuing to assess and look at needs and cost. And I feel confident that we're probably going to be looking at more monies to send to the area. But we have to make sure that we are properly assessing and sending monies that are needed for the right reasons and to the right areas, not just haphazardly be throwing money into it to say we're doing it.
That's right. We're talking with Representative John Blanton from the 92nd District, representing Pike and Knott and Magoffin counties. You mentioned the $200 million that comes from what's I guess more commonly known as the Rainy Day Fund. It's the Budget Reserve Trust Fund. $115 million of that $200 million will be provided to the Department of Military Affairs Division of the Emergency Management. What exactly? Just kind of let's go through a little bit. So, to be clear, none of this money is going to really be done to provide housing. It's going to be about infrastructure and support systems, road repair, bridges repair, school repair. Is that a fair assessment as to what the money's going to be spent on? That it's really going to be about infrastructure, water displacement, roads and bridge repair, school repair, people to have access to their homes and help them clean up. Is that right?
That is partially correct.
Okay.
The monies that goes to military affairs, keep in mind that's through the emergency management, and they're also the ones that's buying the trailers for short-term housing.
Okay.
We call it intermediate housing. So there is a housing component. It may not specifically say housing, but they have that authority and are doing that with that. As a matter of fact, I've been on the phone in Knott County, which is one of my counties. We have 30 more trailers en route. So we do have funding to provide intermediate get housing, to get people out of shelters and back into something that they can live in as an individual family and a roof over their head, with water and sewer and heat and air. So that is a component. Plus, there's also, when you look at the school funding, it's not just to repair schools, but for wraparound services for students as well. We anticipate there's going to be a need for maybe even mental health assessments and different things, and those monies can be used for that as well, along with the waiver days and the remote learning days that's been added to the bill for the schools that's been impacted as well.
We're talking with Representative John Blanton from the 92nd District. There had been some talk late last week that there might be the need for a second special session, and from what I've heard and some reports out there, that it would be more directed towards housing. And do you think that will happen? Is it needed?
Well, I think we've got to continue to assess, and obviously there's got to be a need, and we have to start looking at long-term housing. This first special session was to address the immediate need. This is going to be a long-term rebuilding, but we also have to look at where are we going to rebuild these houses. We don't want to put them back in a floodplain, so we have to gather more information, again, to not do something haphazardly, but to make sure we get it correct. And I feel like leadership and the governor, if that need arises and we get that finalized where we know what we need, we know how we can go about doing it, and that arises prior to January, I feel certain that we would all be comfortable in going back and doing that. But we have to make sure we get it right. And obviously that is a component that we are looking into, and even about where these locations might be to put these individuals. So that is, that is all being considered as we move forward.
We're talking with Representative John Blanton from the 92nd District. So many people lost their homes. I mean, are we able to calculate how many homes were lost? How many families, how many people were displaced and are without places to live now? Do we know?
We don't know the exact number, but we're looking at about 7,500 houses that's been damaged and or destroyed. We have 24 people currently, 25 if you count the Jenny Wiley Lodge, is currently still displaced in Knott County. And I tend to use those numbers because that's the county in my district that has been impacted, and I know the numbers of now Pike County. We still don't have people displaced and so forth, but Knott County we do. So I can't answer the exact numbers. I know in Perry County over the weekend we did have intermediate housing arriving. The problem there had been locations to put the intermediate housing, and they've addressed that, and those are have been arriving over the weekend.
Representative, will the state government play a role in rebuilding these homes for the people? Or, but in terms of rebuilding their permanent structure, are they kind of on their own? Will the state government play a role in helping out in that process? Is there a point where the state government can't go any further in terms of assistance?
It's something we got to look at. This is, doing that would be unprecedented. And we have to look at, one, is it something that fits of state government? Is it legal for state government to even do? Because now we're getting into private housing. Is that doable? We don't know the answer to that question just yet. But we're looking into those things. And then again, we set a precedent. Do we start at every natural disaster? So we're going to do everything we possibly can to get these people back up on their feet and be as much assistance to them as we possibly can be. But again, we've got to know the answers to the questions before we can make decisions.
I fully admit that I don't know all the details about how this works, but in terms of flood insurance, I guess that's something that's offered on the federal level. Is that something that homeowners should be encouraged to buy or to inquire about if they live in an area that potentially could be flooded? Were there any people that lost their homes that have flood insurance, as a for instance?
So, yes, I do encourage people that live in a potential area that could potentially receive flooding. But I do understand that the cost of flood insurance sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, is just not affordable for people.
Right.
I talked to one of my constituents that she had been paying $300 a month for years
Mm-hmm.
on flood insurance, and a few years back just got to the point they no longer could afford it, and they quit carrying it. And you know, she got her house. They're trying to salvage the house and repair it, but she lost everything
Mm-hmm.
that they'd been working 52 years for.
Wow.
So, it's affordability issue, and it's one of those things that I encourage people to look into it. I encourage them, if at all possible, to try to get it. But it's an individual thing. They have to look at the risk that they think they're and how much they're willing to invest in that.
We're talking with Representative John Blanton from the 92nd District. I want to shift gears and talk about the education. What about the kids that live in these areas? Are they able to go to school yet? Are they able to do virtual learning? Are they being taught in maybe makeshift schools temporarily? Kind of where do things stand? Because I think every kid in Kentucky, and I guess both private and public, would be in school by now in their school calendar year. So what about these schools in Eastern Kentucky? These communities were affected. Where do they stand? What are they looking at in terms of getting back into school and getting back to some kind of normal educational learning? 'Cause especially on the heels of having the last 2 years kind of upended by COVID.
Well, we're trying to get them back in the classroom as soon as possible. I think Breathitt County, seen on the news this morning, Breathitt County was looking at trying to get back in this week, maybe. Knott County, I want to say it's September the 19th. It's either the 15th or 19th that they plan on being back in the classroom. Now, it's going to mean shifting some students around, maybe sending them to other schools, especially with a couple schools that's been totally lost. It's going to be, we're looking in temporary classrooms. We're looking at all those things that we can get these students back in the classroom as soon as possible. But we did provide, to ensure they get their instructional days, the waiver days, and the 20 remote learning days that they can utilize. And those remote learning days can be so laser focused, not down to a single class, but even to a group. And we let the school systems make that call as to how they need to utilize them to get their students back in the classroom as soon as possible. So I think we will see a variety across each county of how that looks. Some of them will get back up and running fairly normally, and then some of them, again, is going to have to bring in temporary classrooms. They're going to have to send students maybe to other school locations because we have some schools that's just going to have to be totally rebuilt.
For comparison's sake, I mean, how does the dollars for emergency relief for Eastern Kentucky, how does it compare to the tornado damage back in December? I mean, because I know that they were kind of modeled after each other. I mean, were they similar kinds of investments?
They were similar, and that was kind of the starting point. Now, from talking with different people, including those in Western Kentucky and the current executive branch, they're in comparing the two, the type of damage is different, and it's been said that the flooding has actually been more destructive, and it's because of all the mud and things that have been incurred in the homes. And so, I think it's not setting a dollar amount. Do we spend an equal amount? Do we spend less? Do we spend more? We spend what the needs are to help the people of Eastern Kentucky get the recovery that they need to begin to rebuild. And, we're a resilient people in Eastern Kentucky. We're a strong people, and we will rebuild, and we will come through this. But myself as a legislator and other legislators, we also have concern about, are we going to lose more population because of this? Did someone lose a home, and now they're saying, well, since I'm going to have to make a move anyways, am I going to move out of the area? So, that brings up things of concern. One of the things we addressed in the bill is we've seen in Western Kentucky where property values have dropped tremendously, which means local tax revenues has plummeted, because a piece of property that once had a house on it, let's say, use an example, valued at $250,000, maybe now it's only valued at $25,000 or $50,000, and they've literally lost millions in millions of dollars in value of properties. And we're anticipating the same thing in Eastern Kentucky. So we have to begin to look at that and the impact it's going to have.
Yeah, you do worry about some of the very small communities that have a lot of long history in Eastern Kentucky that might not come back. And in terms of investment in infrastructure too, I mean, how much? Because one thing is you want to get people up and running quickly, but you also have to invest smartly too. Do you begin looking at things like infrastructure on how to displace water so that this doesn't happen again? It's not just so much about getting people back to where they were, but also putting them in a position where they don't face this kind of tragedy again.
Absolutely, and we are looking at that. We are having conversations about properties, and I'll not get into specifics, but they are properties that are on a higher elevation that would get them up out of the floodplain. But the question is still being decided how we go about doing that, how we put it all together. But we do have some property in mind that is being discussed. So that's all part of the process, and that's why again we come in, we send in for the infrastructure and the things in this first special session. Maybe I shouldn't say first special session, but in this past special session, and as we gather more and more information, we put more and more pieces of the puzzle together, and then we address it as we need to.
One last question, and I'll let you go. Kind of to sort of circle back to reference Jen Psaki, former White House spokesperson. But do you think there will be a special session, or do you think that we're in a holding pattern and can wait until the General Assembly coming up in January?
I think that would be too hard for me to commit to say, yes, I think they will be. I think everyone is prepared if it's necessary, but not unless we have the information we would need to do that. And if we don't have that, then we will look at taking it up in January.
Representative Blanton, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be in touch and continue talking about this, because this is something that's going to be a challenge for Eastern Kentucky for a long, long time. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Larry.